So welcome to Teacher Education and EAP Special Interest Group. My name's Carol McDermott. I'm one of the co-chairs of it, and I'm here with Christina, Angeliki and Stella from our committee. We'll give you links to our SIG web pages if you haven't all seen them later on. This is our fourth year, I think, of events, and this is the first talk of this year. We've invited Gary Hernendez from the University of Leeds because we saw him do a very interesting and quite provocative talk at EAP Crete early in the year, and we thought it would be great for the teacher education in EAP SIG. So the SIG's aims are to consider issues in education for EAP teachers, either for the individual, how we develop ourselves, or how we can develop frameworks and support at the organizational or institutional level. And so Gary's talk's going to be on a mentoring program. If you've seen the bio, you'll know that he's experienced in pre-sessional and in-sessional EAP teaching, that he set up a mentoring program in Sudan, and is going to talk to us about a mentoring program that he set up at Leeds. And I think with that, I'll just pass over to you, Gary. Thank you very much for agreeing to do a talk for us.
Oh, thank you,
Sorry,
Carol.
just one last thing. Gary's going to talk, and then there'll be time for question and answers at the end, and we'll record the talk, but rather than the question and answers. Sorry.
Great. Thank you, Carol. It's really nice to be here. Thanks, everyone, for coming. There's more people than I expected, actually, which is it good? I think it's good. I think it's good. I was saying to Carol and people before, it's been years since I've been on Zoom, so it's somewhat triggering. Hopefully this will go all right and I can remember which buttons to press. So I'm just going to bring up the slides. I'm going to assume you can all hear me and that you can all see everything. But of course, if you can't, or if there are any issues, please do shout and I'll try and rectify that. Okay, so as Carol said, I'm going to talk for a bit. Around half an hour-ish. It depends how long I waffle on for at certain points, and then give an opportunity for some discussion afterwards, because I'm going to expect some comeback and maybe some disagreement with me, which is great, but we'll have to see. The other thing I want to say before I start, I'm fairly new to kind of teacher education or teacher education in general, and I was kind of ended up with a role that I have setting up this mentoring program largely by chance. So I'm perhaps a sort of an enthusiastic novice, which is perhaps a dangerous place to be. So hopefully by doing this, I'm going to form some connections with some of you that know more than I, and that'll help to develop my understanding. So I really don't feel like I'm an expert at all, although I do believe in what I'm saying in the mentoring program that we're rolling out in Leeds. So what I want to look at, I'm going to sort of give an overview of the mentoring program. And it comes from Maldres 2024, the kind of framework for the mentoring program. But I want to sort of link the program that I've started in Leeds with EAP more generally, because I think the mentoring approach is for all kind of educational settings and often talks in terms of, you know, a school setting, a secondary school or primary school setting. But I think it can work in an EAP context as well. So I want to relate it to EAP, and I also want to relate it to what happens at the University of Leeds Language Centre and what we currently have in terms of professional development or any mentoring that goes on. I'm not going to talk too much about the institutional frameworks within Leeds, because I often find that when I listen to other talks and people can talk at some length about their own institutions, I get lost. I have trouble understanding my own institution, so I'm not going to expect you to have a kind of understanding of mine. So I'll do that briefly. So we're going to look at the aims of the program. I'm going to unpack those aims a little bit and link them to EAP, and then we'll look at some theoretical underpinnings, some feedback, initial feedback from the program, some challenges, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay, so current teacher development within the Language Centre, within the University of Leeds, because the title is called Rethinking, I mean, I think I need to sort of try and establish what current thinking is. And I'm going to do that by looking at what currently goes on within the Language Centre. And what you have on the slide here are file names to an online resource that staff can access. And this is to do with what they call continuing professional development. So if staff want to know what goes on in the Language Centre in terms of CPD, they can go to this file, and the first one will say CPD and observations. And if you click into that, there'll be another file which says continuing professional development, including observations. So I think from that, I can observe that continuing professional development includes observations. Observations are seen as part of continuing professional development or some sort of professional development. And what I want to argue in this talk is essentially that I don't think that's ever possible. I'm not saying that observations don't have their use. I think for quality assurance purposes, they are valid. And there are elements of peer-to-peer observations that may be useful. But in terms of a formal observations, producing effective professional development, I don't think it can ever happen, really. So that's what I'm going to say. But I think that is what is considered normal within the Language Centre to some extent. Within the university-wide, within Leeds, there is a mentoring scheme, but I think it's more kind of old-fashioned or traditional, perhaps, in its approach. It's the idea of kind of the sharing of knowledge and skills, the transferring from one to the other by an experienced other. Again, I think there's a place for that, and I think the university-wide mentoring scheme is more focused on career development, promotions, rather than teaching and developing teachers per se. So I think there's a place for what currently exists, but I think there is a gap for a mentoring scheme that really focuses on teaching and teachers development and does not include observations, essentially. Okay, so the aims of the development programme, the aims that we started with, or that I want to try and achieve, is to develop staff professionalism and develop research-informed practice. And I'm going to sort of unpack what I mean by those two things in a second. I think there are other aims of the programme which I think are just as valid, but I'm not going to talk about them in depth today. And they are to enhance informed scholarship, increase job satisfaction, increase teacher well-being, staff well-being, and increase teacher retention. But I'm really going to focus on the top two. So in terms of professional development, I didn't find much out there in the EAP literature on professional development. If you know of stuff that I don't know about, please let me know. So I'm going to lean quite heavily on an article by Fitzpatrick et al. From 2022 that does talk about professional development. And the key takeaways at this point of the talk are that Fitzpatrick et al. Say that there is a gap in the professional development of EAP teachers, however we're understanding professional development, but there is also an importance of it in order to allow teachers to develop and become professionals in their field. So there is an idea of developing and an idea of teachers becoming professionals, and in order to do that, professional development is important, but we kind of need to unpack that a little bit. But sort of broadly, I think I want to sort of set that context. The definition of being a professional or professional development that I want to use or I employ on the mentoring programme is taken from Maldres 2024, and I'm going to show you what that is in a minute. But I think there are links and crossovers to perhaps what is also considered important in being a professional within Barleap. So this is taken from the competency framework, and I've sort of highlighted in bold those areas that I think are important or that I think link to a definition that I'm going to use in a minute. So I'll just read it. I'm sort of missing half of it because I can see some of your faces, but anyway, I can sort of guess what the words are. Practitioners are expected to demonstrate systematic understanding of the main theoretical areas of discipline and critical awareness of current issues and problems, highlighted in bold. They should be able to exercise independent initiative to make complex decisions, plans. They should show a commitment to continue to develop. So the ideas of awareness of current issues, exercising independent initiatives, and a commitment to continue to develop, I think are important or part of being a professional or included in professional development. So I'm going to flick a little bit between slides. So apologies if this is going to make you a little bit dizzy. But the definition of being a professional that I'm taking is from Maldres 2024. And I'm really going to focus on the top two. Not that the next three are not important, but I think they're sort of fairly self-explanatory. So the top one is the ability to manage their own teachers' ongoing learning and to make their own informed decisions and judgments. So to manage your own ongoing learning, I think, relates to the idea of a commitment to develop. Make your own informed decisions and judgments, perhaps relates to the idea of exercising independent initiative. I can see a link there. And then keeping up to date, the second point on the slide there, I think relates to, I can't find the right button, being aware of the current issues and the current problems. So those are the key elements that I think relate to a definition of being professional from Maldres 2024, which the mentoring program is aiming to enhance. The other ones, as I say, I think are a bit more kind of self-explanatory. Okay, so part of professional development is the concept of development. I think this is one of those words which often gets used and doesn't really get talked about or unpacked, such as culture. So I want to, if you'll indulge me, kind of go off a little bit on a tangent to sort of try and explain what I understand by development and then how it relates to professional development more specifically. Development, I noticed, I was fiddling around on the Barley website the other day looking at the jobs, and it says at the top that Barley core values, and one of which is development. Maybe it does explain what they mean by development somewhere. I don't know. I didn't look in detail, but it often people just say it without kind of explaining what they mean by it. I used to, before working at the University of Leeds, I worked in international development for a little bit. And I also studied it at postgraduate level. So I've been kind of wrestling with what it means for quite a long time with limited success. But I think there are similarities with development or international development and education more broadly, not that they are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think both development and education are concerned with change and change management in some way. And I think that both disciplines or practices can learn from each other, really. So if I'm taking international development, some learnings that I have from that and trying to sort of transfer that into an educational context, I suppose that's what I'm trying to do here. Broadly, I think international development and development is concerned with poverty, sort of understanding it and finding solutions to it. But there are differing understandings of it and therefore approaches to finding solutions to poverty. And I think the values that I want to take or conceptual framework of development that I find useful is that of Amartya Sen, who was a Nobel Prize winning economist who came up with a conceptual framework which influenced the UN Development Programme's Human Development Reports and the current Human Development Index, which has a more multi-dimensional understanding of poverty. So if you'll indulge me, I'll briefly explain, only briefly, and then sort of take the values from that, which I want to put into the mentoring program. Essentially, what Amartya Sen talked about was ideas around poverty being concerned with what people value being or doing rather than what they have or what they feel. What Amartya Sen was focused on is what people value being or doing, and he calls those functionings. So, for example, you could value being a doctor, but also there was more complex functionings. For example, people could value being a respected member of society, for example. So whatever a person values being or doing is going to be different, basically. And then he focused on the capacity to achieve whatever it is that people value being or doing. If there is the capacity to achieve that, there is a reduction of poverty and you are free. If you don't have the capacity to achieve whatever it is that you value, there is poverty. You are poor, if you like. So income is important to that, but it's much more kind of multifaceted than that and doesn't necessarily view income and GDP as the ends. The key to this approach of development as freedom is that poverty and development is understood as coming from the bottom up, and it's very individualized. Okay, so that understanding of to develop somebody coming from the bottom up and being individual, I think, is important within any understanding of any sort of professional development. So those are the kind of key values and principles that I'm taking from an understanding of development.